Hello, hello, and welcome to everybody watching. Hello, Jeremy. How are you?
Hello, Mike. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. Second time lucky there. I had a bit of a mishap with my first attempt. It's been a while since we've since we've been live.
It's a
So
while.
it is very good to see you. And tonight we're meeting up. A slightly different format to before. It's myself and Jeremy, and we've each brought a cask strength whiskey to enjoy. And we're going to talk about cask strength whiskies. We're going to talk about life, and we're going to talk about dentistry. So first of all, Jeremy, what whiskey have you brought to enjoy while we have our catch up?
Tonight, I feel like on Strictly, which my wife is definitely watching.
Indeed,
And
we do.
it's a Highland Park cask strength. This is such a fabulous whiskey, and I'm going to talk to you about it. But yeah, we're going to talk about Highland Park cask strength. So there you go. And yourself, what are you bringing?
I am having my Edgewood straight from the cask whiskey here, so that's what I'm bringing, and this is one that I bought from the distillery, and it's a great little whiskey, but I like packaging as well, and this has a really nice box that comes in, and it just slides open, and there it is inside. So that's what I'm having tonight.
Can't knock that.
So Highland Park, for those who perhaps are not as into their whiskies, whereabouts is the Highland Park distillery?
Well, Highland Park I've been privileged to visit as well. It's actually right on the north coast of Scotland, right just beyond it, and it's Orkney. I flew to Orkney actually from Aberdeen every year. I go up to Deeside, and my history with Deeside is that I actually proposed to my wife on the banks of the River Dee, and every year we've been up to Scotland, and for years we've been visiting distilleries. And I've got to admit something, Mike.
Yeah.
At the age of 29, 30, it was about 1988 when I would have been a tender age of 28. I first went to visit. I was working in London, and somebody got a free go and visit a timeshare and fly you up, blah, 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 and free hotel. And so I went to Craig and Darragh in Ballater. And I actually, I'm glad my wife's not listening to this. I went up there with a lady, and I thought it was fantastic. And that lady kind of went, and a new model, i.e. my wife, came into my life. And during that time, I managed to persuade them I could go up again. I even sent my parents there on a weekend. And I literally proposed to my wife on the banks of the River Dee, and then went and bought the timeshare, and been going up there ever since. It's changed ownership a few times. And I've got to admit something. I used to go to distilleries on tours and everything, but I have to say this, and I'm embarrassed to say it, I hated whiskey. Didn't like it. I was into cocktails, vodka, absinthe cocktails, and all of the cocktails, and I was quite a mixologist. But my father always liked a wee dram, but he was happy with, your bog standard bells, things like that. And quite sad, I say, that even when he was, dare I say, in the last few days of his life, I remember taking a dram of whiskey to his lips when he was bedridden. But I just didn't like whiskey, nor did my brother. And only literally a year or two after he's passed away, or less than a year, I suddenly got the bug.
Yeah.
And it's,
Hi, Vic.
And it's become an obsession since then.
Yeah.
And
it kind of does that to you, doesn't it?
It takes over your life, and I absolutely adore it. And one of my closest and oldest friends, who I'd known literally since I was 3 years of age, and that's many years ago, and he and I didn't really know that we both loved whiskey, and there you go. We absolutely are obsessed with it. And Deeside right at Highlands, and then I've gone beyond. And Highland Park was, I said to my wife, oh, let's go to Orkney. So we flew from, when we were up there, flew to for a couple of days from Dice, Aberdeen Dice, and landed in Orkney, hired a car. And many of you know that Highland Park and the other brother, if you're, well, not even brother, I would say, they're a strange brother, Scapper. But Highland Park is, if you like, the one steeped in history, and it's a distillery that goes back to 1798. So, and really, and any of you have been to, I've been fortunate to go both to Orkney and to Shetland. They're not really Scotland in the typical, they've got strong roots, but when you actually go there, it's completely different to the mainland. When you go there, you suddenly realise that what are trees, and they're flattened by the winds and everything, particularly Shetland.
Yeah. I think as Billy Connolly says that all the trees from Shetland and Orkney are actually in Norway. They'll get blown to Norway.
Yeah, it's quite dramatic, but what a place to visit.
Yeah,
and it's fascinating. Even if you're into archaeology, there's archaeology going back before Stonehenge there in Orkney, and it's a fabulous, interesting British military history and World War battles of
of course,
yeah. It's fascinating, and sunk ships and everything, and I loved it. It is a different experience, and both Shetland and Orkney have an archipelago of islands, and it's amazing to visit. And I'd encourage anybody out there, go. It's fabulous. If you really want to eat and breathe something a little different, go to these islands. You won't be disappointed. No, I would not take your swimming costumes to go on the beach, although it can occasionally show itself for some. And be prepared to certainly have some rainwear. But I actually think it's a real experience. But let me talk a little bit about this.
Yes, please.
First of all, look at this bottle. Is that not amazing? You know,
I think that what that says to me as well, because obviously the Orkneys and Shetlands have got this strong kind of Viking connection as well, and there's a real Viking feeling to that bottle, isn't there?
It is. It's beautifully ornate. The great thing, and I shouldn't whisper it, I'll whisper this. This is cask strength.
Yeah.
Certainly is under 60 quid. Around, you can get it, the mid-50s is a general price. This was batch one. I'd always wanted a Highland Park cask strength. And the only ones I'd actually had were those own bottlings. And it was amazing in the past year that they came up with this. And I can't remember if it was just pre-lockdown or during lockdown that I got this. And I think it was just pre-lockdown. I was amazed, got my bottle. And I was a bit doubtful in one way, thinking it was an unaged statement. And you've got to say something about the master blender, which is Gordon Motion. Since about 2004, they put all their whiskies in both European and American oak. This is mostly made up of whiskies from American oak. Only sherry butts. They don't use any bourbon, not anymore. And I'll tell you a story about that later, but about my experience with bourbon barrels on Highland Park, how I made a fool of myself. But it's actually sherry butts, and hence you get a lovely golden colour. There's no caramel in this. It's pure unadulterated from the barrel, the colour. Mm-hmm. And unusually, now I've spoken about this before on our whiskey meetings, I like for two things. One, a glass. And if you want to invest in a glass, and I'm going to tell you, Mike, after this, order from a company called Rauk, R-A-U-K. They do the Norland whiskey glass and everything else. They do the heavy tumbler.
Mm-hmm.
This is glass that you can feel. And the reason I like this is because I never want to follow the crowd, never had in my dental career, nor ever in whiskey.
Mm-hmm.
I don't mind a chink. And that's a single chink. And Tesco sell them as a super size cube. And I like a nice large whiskey cube. People who tell me, and we're all scientists as dentists to some extent, who they'll say, oh, you can't, it decreases the evaporation and therefore you don't get the nose correct. I think if you're that good to tell the nose between when it's got a chink of ice or in it, I would doubt. And you can't even do a double blind trial because the coolness, you would know immediately. There's no placebo here. You would immediately tell what you've got. And to be honest, when it melts, and I've had this sitting there, you get a little bit of water. So it dilutes, and with a cast strength, you need it to be diluted. And I like things cold, and it soon warms up in your mouth. So do you lose any of the experience? Of course, the aficionados say, and this is actually whether you call it a Glencairn or a nosing glass, is actually from Highland Park. Mm-hmm. And so when I pour it, and I'll pour it into the nosing glass first, what do you notice? Besides the colour. And from the bottle, look at that. It, like many whiskies, when you put in the nosing glass compared to that, it seems to lighten up a little, less liquid. And when you nose it, and I say there's an unfortunate part about this whole experience for you. Don't read the box. I did read the box because it'll influence you, particularly those boxes that tell you about what you're to expect. The first thing you notice about this particular Highland Park is, and I was so shocked actually, no smoke. Very, you smell it. You can smell heathery, fruity notes. Again, don't look at the box. It says vanilla pods. That's lost on me. Maybe on pure oak bourbon barrels, you get the vanilla. I didn't get any vanilla flavor, so it missed on me. But what I do get is that really rich fruit cake, beautiful aromas of zest, of tanginess, of fruitiness, and maybe a wisp of smoke at the end, but certainly not what I expected. And Highland Park's an interesting whiskey because they smoke both unpeated with peated, and then a day they'll have anthracite, and then they'll mix it with some unpeated barley as well before they put it in the to mature with the yeast and everything, and use a dried yeast with it and the whole experience. So I was quite surprised by this, the lack of smoke. And highlight, and it was quite an experience to, first of all, it really threw me that, hey, this isn't Highland Park. I can't smell the smoke. But the good thing is, when you taste it, is that, again, what's the first thing you notice with a cast strength? The alcohol. Wow. And that hits you. And then as that dies down, you get fruit and zesty citrus. And I even got grape. Again, don't look at the box because I didn't get the nutmeg. And as for toffee, no chance. And I know, Mike, you've been to Tomatin, and the Tomatin cast strength is just full of toffee. This, again, I don't get it from the box. And I'm not one to follow the crowd, so I won't say, oh, yes, I can taste the toffee. I don't at all. I get the fruits, the heather, the honey. I mean, you can almost taste the bees. It's amazing. And it's only after you taste that and then the flavor lingers and you get to the aftertaste and you're left with that. The palate's so fruity, and then you get the wisp of the smoke of it. But it's not heavy. And I was quite surprised because I expected a Highland Park where, you know, you can taste the peat on any regular. I didn't get it as much. And I think that's a benefit. I expected it to be overpowering, but it's still there. And it's a phenomenal whiskey. And I'm going to say to anybody out there, buy a bottle, even if you don't like smoke. And I know a lot of people say, Islays are a whole different ball game, and I love my Islays, and I like the full range of whiskies. And I know a lot of people, you know, will turn the nose up at them. But even if you don't like your peat, even if you turn your nose up at a Benromach or some of the other Campbelltown, you're going Scotia's, anything where, oh, I don't like the peat. This is one to savour because it doesn't hit you in the same way. And the whole experience of this is A1. I can't tell you how much I rate it. I know you and I share something, Mike. I was a big Abuna fan from Aberlour. I remember batch 1, and I remember the whole experience of that whiskey is fabulous. It's also, like this one, an unaged statement.
Yeah.
I would say this being unaged, I was doubtful, I was everything. But this I rate so highly amongst any, and I've been fortunate to taste some of the 30-year-old expressions of Highland Park. And I was going to tell you a little story, and I might hand over to you, and I'll save my little story about Highland Park and how I made a fool of myself.
I don't want to miss that story, so I'll definitely.
But let's go over to you with your Edinburgh.
Indeed. For some reason, we're not getting everybody's names coming up when the comments are coming in. So if you tag your name at the end of it, it will have your name on Facebook. But I think you have to give permission somewhere for it to come through to us in the live broadcast. So someone is talking about the Glenlivet Founders Reserve behind me here. I think it's on this side up here. And Glenlivet is a really great daily dram. Not expensive, but a really, really nice mellow dram. So you're right. You're absolutely right with what you said about me and my Aberlour Abuna. I even have it down here because I was going to tell the story of this. Now, I didn't really start drinking whiskey until my 30th birthday. And on my 30th birthday, my wife held a surprise birthday party for me. And all the guests arrived, and of course, lots of people. What do you buy? A meal for a surprise 30th, birthday. I got loads of bottles of whiskey. Now, until that point, I would maybe have one open bottle of whiskey in the house, and it would take me 6, 7, 8 months to very slowly get my way through this. And it would usually be a Glenlivet or a Glenmorangie or something fairly standard. And so I got all these lovely bottles, and they sat in the cupboard for a few months until we had a relative who came to stay with us from America. And I asked, do you enjoy whiskey? I'm not really sure. So I decided let's just open a few bottles and we'll compare and contrast. And that was really the day that the world of whiskey really opened up for me. It was opening up, 7 or 8 bottles and sitting and sampling different whiskies and really appreciating that there is massive differences here between these different ones. And very quickly, the Buna was one of the whiskies that I opened that day. And very quickly I realized, yes, I like a sherry whiskey. So the Buna is always on the shelf. It's one of my go-to whiskies. So we're getting a couple of other messages. It's your daily dram, and I think that is coming in. Oh, Alistair Gillis, you're the one having the Bowmore 12. Very good, sir. Good. So yes, what did I bring? So I brought the Edra. I thought I was going to be too predictable if I brought the Abuna to the cask tasting, so I brought the Edra. Now this distillery is near Lochray. It's just near Perth in Scotland. So this is an age statement. It's a 10-year-old cask strength, and it is very heavily sherried. One of the things I love And you know, as you know, Jeremy, you cannot judge a good whiskey necessarily by age, or even necessarily by color. You know, there is this belief that the darker the whiskey, the better, and that is not always true. That said, this whiskey has got a fabulous color. Look at the color. It's like flat Coca-Cola. It's so dark. Really, really dark whiskey, and I believe there are no colours added to it, because obviously some distilleries will add, I think, is it E150, the colouring that goes in. They won't always necessarily want to admit that they've added colouring, but sometimes they have. This one apparently is not. So I have it in a nice crystal tumbler here. Now, I like you, Jeremy, I like a glass, and the whiskey I'm drinking will depend on which glass I choose. And when I have my very special Edredar straight from the cask 10-year-old, I have to say I like it in a nice crystal tumbler. There's just a certain amount of class that goes with that. So here we go on the nose. So straight away, it's the dried fruits and the kind of spiciness. I can get the spiciness coming through straight away. But there is also a kind of orangey zest to it, a marmalade-y kind of smell. And it is powerful. It is a nice, strong whiskey. And again, it's deceiving when you sample on the nose and then take that taste. And as you're saying, Jeremy, the first thing that hits you is that kick of alcohol. Now, obviously, you're going to get that a lot stronger in the cask strength. You know, if you're sampling a whiskey, you don't get the full flavors on that first sip. So it's very difficult on one sip to be able to describe the palate and everything that you're tasting. So it's often very sensible to have your first sip, get over that burst of alcohol, and then take your second sip. You know, if you're encouraging a non-whiskey drinker to join you in the world of whiskey, do not allow them to have one sip and make their judgment on whether or not they like whiskey, because they're going to get hit by the alcohol and they'll say that's too strong. So it's for me, it's always the second sip.
What percentage is that, Mike?
Oh yes, I picked it up to be able to do that and I forgot. It is 57.2. So, I mean, historically, when I started drinking whiskey, I would really have struggled to drink, 57% whiskey, and I would have had to add water. But, that's perfect the way it is. And it's raisins and apples, and it's complex. It's got these layers of sweetness to it. The sherry really bursts through. The fruitiness really bursts through. And there's a very lingering kind of caramelly taste as well that sits in the palate. So the burst and the strength of it is quite strong, but it actually dissipates quite quickly, leaving the fruits and the oranges and the sherry and the caramel. And it's simply delicious. So I love my Abuna, but I have to say, that really takes some beating when it comes to being a sherry bomb, which is what a lot of whiskey drinkers will refer to their strong sherried whiskies, the sherry bombs. Again, it has a strong kind of taste of Christmas to me. That is kind of Christmas pudding kind of taste. So, and it's interesting as well. A lot of people who, you go on any whiskey forum, and I read a fantastic comment a few months back, where this thread was evolving about trying to find the heaviest sherried whiskey, and this one's a sherry bomb, this one's a sherry bomb. You have to try this if you love sherry whiskey. And then somebody posted a great remark was, "Why don't you guys just drink sherry?"
That's true. Yeah. I mean, I do different whiskies at different times. I mean, this is really heavy for a normal run-of-the-mill cask strength. I think this is the heaviest in alcohol of any regular cask strength.
So what does that come in?
This is 63.3. And normally whiskey's put into the barrel at around 63%. And then I've got a couple which are done by Signatory, like the Gordon MacPhail Signatory. There's quite a few of them, which are up in the 66s. They are heavy, like you're hit by a mallet. But this really is strong in the alcohol. Perhaps you don't hit it, although you get the hit of alcohol. Perhaps you have had others which hit you more. Maybe the smokiness hides some of it. I don't know, but I've had lesser alcoholic cask strengths which have hit me more than this Highland Park. It's very smooth, and that's why I'm so in love with it. And I was surprised. And one of the things you'll notice, Mike, about your Abuna is that I've been fortunate to have quite a few different batch numbers, and they do vary. And I would be very intrigued to see how the different batch numbers of Highland Park, because the Abuna, some of them were some of the early ones were just truly unbelievable. And then I remember some of the late ones, they were still nice, but they weren't as amazing. So a little bit of hit and miss, I can say. But, we're both Abuna fans. And I must say I've drunk my last one. I've got lots of Aberlour whiskies. I encourage anyone to go to Aberlour, the distillery, because they do have a lot of distillery-owned versions, and well worth a visit.
And they've got the Cask Ama now, which is obviously the Abuna started off when I first bought it. You could buy it for like £35, £40, and they suddenly hiked the price up to about 90, which caused a lot of offence to the Abuna drinkers. You can actually get it for a bit cheaper now. It's dropping back down to around the 60, 70 mark now, which is probably about right for it, I think. But the Cask Ama was brought out, and I think it's kind of the little brother of the Abuna. It's not a cask strength, but it has some of the similar profiles to it. So it's a nice one to have on the shelf as well.
48%, and I think they were. I remember even Waitrose had it down as little as £25 a bottle. Yeah, we bought a few Abunas in those days, but then it went up. And you're right. They think, great, we've got a great whiskey here. Let's hike the price. They did, and the reason it's coming down because it's not selling. Because once you start, into the 90s and everything else, let's face it, there are other whiskies to try.
Indeed.
And dare I say, some even more sophisticated, better perhaps for the money and age statements. So
absolutely. I had last night. I had in the glass the Glenfarclas 25, beautiful whiskey, and that's around the £90 mark. So I have to say, if I'm looking at a Glenfarclas 25 and the Abuna at the same price, then a 25-year-old's is gonna win that fight.
My favourite whiskey is Glenfarclas, a brand, and I've got some truly stunning ones behind me from the distillery one-offs, and I've got to tell you, it's amazing, the Glenfarclas, because it's still privately owned, and I love that. It's not been taken over by the Diageos, and I've got to say I've got a lot of respect for Diageo. But
Vic will be pleased to hear you say that.
No, I have got some respect for them because I've actually, they've left a lot of the distilleries to their own. They haven't tried to change too much, and I think we've got to accept the Ricards and everything have taken over. But I do like these private distilleries. And even like someone like, until a couple of years ago, Glendronach was a private distillery, and eventually was bought by Brown Foreman, Jack Daniels. And,
they've got they have Ben Riach as well, and Rachel Barry being the master blender there, and I have got a lot of time for Glendronach. It's a beautiful dram.
Beautiful,
very nice.
I mean, I've got a bottle. I drink all my whiskey. A lot of people buy to collect, and I drink most of mine. And I've got 3 bottles actually on my top shelf right behind me. But, you can see that I don't have many have kept. two are from Lafroig. I have a bottle with the original Cargis, and got the 200-year-old anniversary Cargis as well.
I was going to say a 200-year-old. That's going to be expensive.
It's the 200-year-old anniversary.
Yeah, I get it.
And the other one, I've got a Dalmore. I've also was given the highest mark by Michael Jackson, the other aficionado of whiskey, not just Jim Murray. And I have got a Glendronach hand-filled from 1993. And it was amazing that they have one that they sell on the internet in 1993. And it's expensive whiskey. Well, for me, it's expensive. I mean, I'll spend so much. But that was about 290 quid a bottle or something.
Yeah.
And I've left it. It was amazing to me to taste the difference between two bottles, but in the same distillery, in the same warehouse, on the same day. And when they were eventually bottled, two completely different tastes. And I had with me, when we were tasting them, a nephew. And what amazed me, Mike, was that even, to the uninitiated, and I wouldn't, I think there's a lot of hype with whiskey, you couldn't fail to taste the difference between these two bottles that have been in the same warehouse. And you just think, wow. And you mentioned about whiskey and tasting the different flavors. It's a bit like wine, isn't it? There's a lot of bull with it,
really?
But you can certainly taste the differences.
Let me show you this very quickly. Obviously, Vic's just come in and said about the Glenglassaugh. I'm going to just zoom in on myself to show you this. So this was actually bought and given to me by a patient a few years back, and it was simply sublime. It is one of the nicest whiskies I've had, and also, I generally will throw bottles and things away once I've finished. It is a bottle that I held on to despite the fact that I finished it. So there we go, Vic. I'll remove this tag here. So this was a Glenglassaugh 26, but the etching in the bottle, even the cork at the top, was just beautiful. It's a beautiful, beautiful bottle. So my mother at Christmas time gave me bottle lights. And there we go. So the Glenglassaugh 26 is also my lamp. So it remains in the collection despite being empty. So I thought I'd share that with you, given Vic's comment there.
You mentioned about Glenglassaugh. I've been fortunate. I visited that distillery, not this year, the year before, and I bought a Glenglassaugh. A remarkable one. It was actually done distillery only in a masala wine. Fantastic. And Glenglassaugh is a whiskey with history, but it closed for a lot of years and then it reopened. And there is so many of these, besides new distilleries, old distilleries reopening, and Glenglassaugh was one of them. And
I'm also just going to make a comment here as well. If you're having cask strength and you want to add a little bit of water, I have a pipette and my water decanter, and I will take, there's nothing worse than having a really nice malt and you want to add some water and your hand slips and you put too much in. So generally speaking, if I want to open it up a little bit, I will just drip in a few drips, and you can actually see because it's non-chill filtered, you'll actually see the cloudiness in the whiskey. And it's one of the tests to make sure your whiskey isn't chill filtered, is actually seeing the cloudiness as the water drips in. Now, especially with a cask strength whiskey, when I add in those few drops of water, already on the nose, I can smell it opening up. The aromas are opening up, and also with the flavors. I mean, that was only 2 or 3 drops of water, and the fruitiness is what's coming through from there for me now. That's like having a mouthful of raisins now. Just the power of it just increases just with those few little drops. So you'll obviously get some purists that will say never add water to your whiskey. Experiment with your whiskey, try it how you like. And for me, especially with the cask strength, I'm not going to water it down, but sometimes we'll drop in a little bit of water just to open up the profiles a little bit more.
And it's interesting you actually mentioned that, Mike, because Highland Park, unusually, I've said this for years because, I like a chink of ice, that they actually recommend trying it in different forms and actually talk about ice. And, dare I say, the distilleries must have listened to me. I say it with jest because, like Darwin, they do the winter, and serve it cold in the fridge and everything. There's a lot of hype with whiskey. And the best thing I ever heard was, I think it was a lady, the manager at Lafroy, who says whiskey should be how you enjoy it. And I've heard that so many times.
Yeah.
And yeah, whiskey should be. I'll tell you a little bit about Edredor. That it's got a real place in my heart because on my big 6-0, I was actually on the high seas in March of this year. And we toyed with the idea, went with masks and everything and flew to Singapore for a night first. And you can imagine how worried we were. And we get to Singapore, it's like COVID. What COVID? They got it under control by then. And the hotel and everything was amazing. And we were there for a night and had a fabulous time. And then we were on our way to Auckland in New Zealand. This is my big 6-0. I know I don't look it, Mike, but there you go.
Yeah, I thought you were much older.
And I can't find a whiskey old enough than that. But I actually, at Shangri Airport, which I don't know if it has the most amazing whiskey collection, bar none. I certainly know that the most expensive retail bottle was ever sold was at Shangri, but they have an incredible collection. And as it is my big 6-0, I didn't care what I spent within reason, a few £100, what bottles I was going to take on my cruise when I eventually got to New Zealand. So I opted for, there was a bottle which was, I thought, I've always had this thing. And I've got a friend of mine, my old friend, David, who may be tuned in. I've always had this thing against the other whiskies. Even the Japanese and the Hakushus, the Hibikis, I rarely get excited, if ever, from any of these. But I decided that it was a whiskey that would have retailed probably about £300 or £400, Kamagachi, and it was on at half price there. So I bought a bottle of that, and it was a 48% Kamagachi. And I also bought an Edredor, and it was Shangri only, Shangri Airport only, the 2010 vintage, done in a Chateauneuf du Pape cask. And I got on my cruise and I actually drank that and I thought, wow. And I was so pleased because it was magnificent, really was great. And you think, it could have been a bit hit and miss, but it was fabulous. Compared to that Kamagachi, which I then opened a few days later, and on my balcony, really enjoying. Oh God, how disappointing! Considering the price, everything, it was, I would say, drinkable, yes, but barely. And you Scots might have it, and I don't care what anyone says. You're Taiwanese, you're Belgium, even you're Israeli. I've tasted so many different, your Kavaland and the Hakushis. They all claim, but even the Swedish whiskies, and my friend is very much into Swedish whiskies. I just, it's like imitating. I have no problem with your bourbons, your ryes, even your Irish whiskey. They don't pretend. But Scotland, I can't understand, why people look elsewhere, because you Scots have it. I say your Welsh counterparts do have a great one in Penderyn.
It's nice, yeah. I've got that there.
Yeah, but
I'm going to show you. I went to the Edredor distillery last year. I'll show you a couple of quick photographs that I took while there. This is the sign on the way in, and the reason why I took this one, Jeremy, is thinking of you. If you look just to the left of the sign there, on the steps underneath the banister, you'll see a little cat running away. Do you see it? So the kind of back end of the cat as it hops up the wall. Do you see it?
Yeah.
That little cat is called Cooper the cat.
Ah, like a Cooper.
And he's the distillery cat, so that's Cooper the cat. So it is. I mean, it's actually a gorgeous distillery. Very, very picturesque. The Edgewater Burn runs through it, and it is a beautiful place.
It used to be the smallest distillery. It no longer is, but it was. And it was actually closed during this summer when I was up in Scotland. It was actually shut, and I actually. The other distillery, actually in the town of Pitlochry, was open, which was Blair Athol, and I bought a bottle there. But I was really disappointed that there you go. It's a fabulous distillery at Edgewater. They also were really influential, I think, in putting whiskey, and never mind the packaging that you love, and I do love my packaging like you. They do these lovely little wooden boxes, and they really were heavily into putting it into different wine casks, and you can get, Edgewater really are a master at putting them into different finishes and, your wine casks and everything else. Everybody else seems to have followed suit. But that really, increases the experience of.
I should really be drinking this faster. I've decided, because that this was the price in the distillery. It was £59, and I had a look online earlier on, and I think it's about 70 to buy it online. So that's a bit of a disgrace that I bought that about a year ago, and it's one of my favourite whiskies, and I'm coveting it and and leaving it in the bottle. That's really shameful, isn't it?
I mean, I've got one friend of mine whose whiskey collection, I would probably say it runs into many tens of thousands of pounds. He buys lots of bottles, and at a family function recently, I went there, and he's got an incredible display of all these bottles in their boxes of, hundreds of pounds a bottle. And he's a great fan of Glendronach, incidentally, but others too. And he's got these bottles and thousands of pounds. And I said, the guy's obviously a very wealthy guy. And I said, have you done? No. And I said, look, you've got 3 or 4 bottles of the 1993. I've got one. And I said, why not drink one? It's about experience. That's why I drink most of my whiskies, because otherwise, what's the point? Whiskey is to enjoy. I understand it, particularly in a time when investment and lockdown has produced all its problem with what do you invest in. Whiskey is a great thing because you can make certainly a lot of money, but I've got to be honest, I don't do that.
That kind of happened to me because I told you that I got a load of bottles on my 30th, and Barry, if Barry's listening from Lefroy, he knows this story, because among these bottles was a bottle of Lefroy 15. And in my early whiskey days, I found the peated whiskies quite difficult, especially the Lefroys, which are very medicinal. It sat on the shelf because I knew I would struggle with it, and I thought I'll wait till my palate has developed a bit more. So now that I enjoy my peated whiskies, I thought, well, I'll open this Lefroy. And then I realised it's worth about £300 or £400 now, because the 15-year-old isn't in production anymore. So it still has the seal on, and I was keeping it just in case we get locked down again and I need to sell it to pay the mortgage,
Well, I mean, I've got that's my original Cargis, the first one, and a friend of mine was saying that is a small mega fortune, and I've never opened, and it's fabulous, and I still remember the flavour from going there, and maybe that'll be a trip we'll do, the Islays.
We've still got to hear your embarrassing story. I'm conscious we are not going to run on to. We had the issue before when we ran these shows that they went on for like 3 hours while everybody gets started.
Right. I'll tell you about the Highland Park.
Yes, let's hear the story.
Highland Park. I like to think I know a little bit about whiskey. And they gave you a dram. I said, what do you think of this? And I went on the VIP tour, and there was 2 other people. Unusually, the 2 people who won a prize, and they were actually resident on Orkney. But so they were natural Orcadians. I like that word, Orcadians. But So we went on, and I was thoroughly enjoying the experience. And you've got to go there because it's almost like the buildings have come up from the earth, because you actually see the stone and everything. It's just fabulous, and they've added on, and it's just a very impressive distillery. And I went in there, and the guy then takes us round, and then he hands you a dram, and he says, "Well, what do you think of this?" And I'm like, "Oh yes." I'm looking at the colour of it, and your Highlands are rich and golden. This was pale and strawy. I just said, "Oh yes," it's tasted it, and it didn't hit me with the alcohol particularly, and I must say I did get that right. It was probably about, fairly low, and I looked at the colour and I thought, I wasn't sure if it was even a bourbon cask, because I know since 2004 they've only done sherry cask, but I looked at it and I said, well, it's probably quite a young whiskey, and I was getting myself, as you say, shoveling, and I was getting deeper and deeper in it. Oh, it's quite a young whiskey. It's not very mature, and, it's, very good. And the guy looks at me and says, gotta tell you, this is actually a 1968, 40.1%. He says, we found this cask in the back of one of the warehouses. We wondered what we could do with it, because it didn't have that much in it, obviously, the Angel Share. And we decided to give it to the VIP customers who came, and it was pale. It was a refill, but I think a second refill. You can only do second refill, so that accounted for the colour. And obviously the lack of alcohol at 40.1, if it would have gone down to 40, they have to throw it away. So that's why they gave it to us. But, it just shows you how you can be actually know nothing, because it was nothing remarkable, for some of the Highland Parks like this, but this was nothing remarkable. 1968, I can't even hesitate. They did have a 1968 whiskey, which was many, many thousands of pounds per bottle, and that would have been a few casks. This was one little cask that they had at the back that they found, and it just shows you think you know everything. Never, you can't. And I have to admit, when you come to refill casks, I've got one here on the shelf of a Glenfarclas that I know we were talked about, and I love it because it's private distillery, and it's a refill, and it was done by I think it's a co-production between Drinks by the Dram, and it's a refill cask, Glenfarclas, and it's much paler in colour than your rich fruity ones like your Edredor you just showed us. But I must admit, when you do get the refills, you're getting more of the whiskey and less of the sherry. So that's always, look for refill butts to enhance your flavour. You may be less impressed with the colour, but you do get different flavours then flooding out. More of the water, if you like, that you get. But that's something to note. So, Mike, I'm going to ask you, because I know we've got a lot of dentists tuning in. I'm in Manchester, and though I would like to say that a lot of my practice private, I'm not exclusively private. I still have a small NHS contract, and thank God with lockdown, it really did help me. And it's something I choose to do at the age I am, and everything else. How is it in Scotland now doing your dentistry?
Well, I mean, obviously, I can comment from the private perspective, because I'm entirely private, so I'm not necessarily up to speed with everything that's happening NHS. Because again, the dynamics of it all changes, day to day, let alone week to week. Certainly we've been back. We're under pretty kind of strict SOPs that we're following. But actually, the last few months I've found kind of tough just by the sheer demand on patient numbers that are coming through. I think part of that has been the restrictions on NHS dentistry has meant we've had a high volume of NHS patients coming through saying, I don't want a huge course of treatment. I don't need a massive treatment plan. I just need you to fix this one problem for me. So we've had a lot of those kind of cases. And I think a lot of patients, you'll have probably had this as well, a lot of patients who maybe had been putting off treatment, who are maybe worried about things locking down again, that really have said, look, I need to get everything fixed, and I want to just go ahead and book it all in straight away. So we've been super busy and factor in trying to calculate your fallow times and work it all out. I'm in the last few months I've rarely been home before 8 o'clock, and that's one of the reasons why this broadcast hasn't been on, and we've been slow to bring it back, because usually by the time the weekend comes around, I'm good for nothing except sitting on the sofa and enjoying a whiskey on my own, let alone trying to do anything else.
That's very interesting. I'm in Manchester.
Yeah.
I have very few adult patients who are on the NHS. I have, but many of them go back decades. My kids are on the NHS, lost leaders, if you like. But most of my income is from the private sector, and I've always chosen from the NHS to remain in it. And I would, for example, take a patient on who's lost their job due to the times we live in. But it's through choice, and I'm one of those very lucky individuals in England who gets a very high UDA rate because I've been doing the job for a long time. So I've had no issues at all. We too have had a lot of patients who have we see privately as emergencies because their NHS dentist hasn't seen them.
Yeah.
I remember the first 2 weeks, England was ahead for once than Scotland, because we got back, and after our first week, it was very interesting. And I don't mind talking turnover a little bit. I was down probably 50%.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh my God, is this what we've got to go to? And I was ahead of the game. I got most of my PPE. I had to wait a little bit for the gowns. But within the second week, my gowns arrived and the AGPs, and I thought, OMG. And I used a stealth mask. I've tried, I'm happy with that. We got fit tested, everything, got everything into place. So we were ready to go. And after a week of thinking, oh God, this is hell. Week 2 was hell, but we'd started doing AGPs, and I thought, I can't do dentistry like this. This is time, Jeremy, to retire. And I swear I'll never retire. I could retire. I don't want to retire. I want another 20 years. That may surprise you. I had a very famous dentist work for me. Some of you out there, the majority of you know his name. His name was Hans Cura. Hans Cura, the Cura Post, the old screw post. He also was one of the founding fathers of the Faculty of General Dental Practitioners in England. And Hans worked for me in the latter part of his years. And I've always run away from associates, I have to say. I have a part-time one now, but I've always run away. But dentistry under lockdown is a whole different ball game. And I thought I'm never going to deal with this. Gowns and everything. I've gone through boxes of gowns, AGPs by many dozens, hundreds, literally. Yeah. And you get used to it. And we have a routine. And
exactly right. Yeah.
And the Scots have led the way with the fallow times. And only the week that's just gone by, there was just over a week, there was a lecture in England, and Sarah Hurley, the CDO, was on there. And there were some scientists, and they started going through, and they brought up my question about, I've literally done this algorithm which works out the air changes per hour in my room with my air conditioning. And I've always thought, well, that's one thing. I've got a virus killer. And go and buy an expensive dental one as though it means any difference. And that adds another few air changes per hour. But I got one off the internet, and it's got a UVC filter, and I'm sure it's doing some good. But my gold standard to meet with the Scottish SDCEP guidelines, which England have followed, is my air change per hour. But the one thing I advocate, and I don't care, and I'll stand up, I'm old enough to to not worry about the CQC or the GDC. I would stand up with them.
Remember your life here as well. This
I
can't be
mind.
edited after.
I fog. And
Is it? Okay.
I use fogging, and it was Sophia Bow and a very good guy who's in Confidential, which I run for Dentists in Distress, a very eminent implantologist, a guy called Bill Schaffer. And these people said about fogging with hypochlorous acid. And hypochlorous acid is actually an endogenous product made in leukocytes. And it kills virus. So does sodium hypochlorite. And I said, and this one said, oh, fogging. Yes, it's okay in other parts of the medical industry, as though she's never read a paper. And I had even sent them the link to a paper that's in September released in the Journal of Maxillofacial Surgery on fogging and the benefits of it, an American paper. And what's interesting is I'll do my AGP, fog, or my nurse's fog in full respirator, fog the room, leave it. We don't wait the 10 minutes we could wait, and we have got the over 10 air changes. We wait 20 minutes. So that will have dropped. But my idea is it's almost thinking like antibiotics, bacteriostatic versus bactericidal. I consider like the bacteriostatic, my air changes per hour, but bactericidal, the fogging, because the hypochlorous acid goes into the air, kills the virus, and it will drop. And the aircon is going on, so it's removing it. And I really do think it's important. And I remember this scientist coming on during the last week and saying, oh yeah, but you don't know the long-term effects of inhaling hypochlorous acid. And I thought, well, for one thing, it will have gone. I wish I could have said to her. But I said, one thing I really do note, and maybe you've noticed this, we're using hospital-grade Milton, which is comprined detergent plus antiseptic. My surgery stinks of Milton. And you wonder, don't worry about the hypochlorous acid, which will have come and gone probably with the aircon, which is going through my surgery with the air changes. But what's the problem, Mike, with ingesting this hypochlorite, sodium hypochlorite? I can smell it in my nostrils. I just wonder about dentistry long term, because it frightened me that this scientist was kind of thinking, well, we could go this way long term. I thought, we really have to stop this long term hypochlorite ingestion and everything else and go back to normal times. We have lived with tuberculosis. We've lived with all these other diseases. And as dentists, we've not been stricken down. And I hope that some sense and normality occurs in our profession, and we don't all have to live behind a respirator forevermore.
It's not easy. It's not an easy way to work at all. To maintain clinical standards and what you're trying to do at the same time is tough.
Are you wearing a hood or a respirator?
I'm wearing mask, Spectra Seals. So I've got two double masked basically. So.
And yeah, I mean,
it's tough. It's tough to breathe on. Yeah. Say again.
It's amazing how you adapt to these ridiculous, stupid. I mean, it's like a game of chess. And anybody who's watching Netflix, The Queen's Gambit is magnificent. And I've been playing chess online for years now. Oh well, for a wee while, and I do enjoy it. But that's a great series. But I feel like The Queen's Gambit or chess has come into my practice because I have a downstairs surgery and I have my hygienist in, or part-time oral surgeon, and various things like that, part-time associate. So it kind of is like one patient has to wait on the waiting in a waiting area before the next one goes out, and it's like almost like trains on a siding before, so that they should never meet. And I've been, with my nurse, stop. That one goes out, and it's like a chess game, like pieces moving so that they shouldn't come.
I know, but I tell you something though, when I think that the risk is despite an awareness, the risk is any complacency starting to come in, because you give yourself any new environment or any new situation to work in, you start to get used to that environment. And I'm not saying you're not following all protocols, but the anxiety that was there in week one is no longer there, because it's the new way that you're working, and you get on with it, until you get a close call, or until there's something that happens that makes you re-question that. And that's when the fear comes back in, and you think, actually, we are on a very, very small tightrope here. We feel that we've got all these protocols and everything's well managed, but all it takes is a phone call from somebody saying, I've just been tested positive, that then makes you question everything that you're doing.
Tumbling down. I mean, I have a relationship with my staff that is unusual. Okay, and my friends, I adore them. We have a love-hate relationship. I love, they hate. No, or at least my practice manager. She's been with me 20 years, but I love them and I treat them very well. Take them away every year. And recently, I did hit hard once, probably too hard. And I said, you've got to imagine, because two patients came to my mind, even though they're socially distanced, perhaps too close to each other. And I said, they were eager that we weren't running behind bringing a patient in. I said, look, you have to understand. You've got to understand that every person could kill another. So you've got to keep them separate. And, they're amazing, your staff. And I mean, I wish they could see this. And I absolutely, as I'm sure you do, Mike, I have a special relationship. And there's one piece of advice from an old one to a relatively young gun. I will say to you, do you know what? When you're interviewing for staff, can I give you one piece of advice? Don't do the interviews.
We don't.
Yeah. Good. Don't you do them. Give it to your practice manager. Give it to your member of staff, because they know you. They know how difficult, or I'm sure you're not, like me, but they know your idiosyncrasies, and they know who they can work with as well.
Exactly right.
They've always done my interviewing for a number of years now. Staff turnover is how are you doing? Low staff turnover.
Actually, the final stage of our interview process is to come and shadow for a session. And not only is the person who's applying for the job getting a sense of what it would be like if they were to work there, but we are then able to speak with the rest of the staff and get their feedback and their opinion on each of the candidates, which is a huge part of the decision, the final decision.
Yeah, very sensible. You're ahead of me, because I made all my mistakes in my.
I would like to say it was my idea, but it was within the business that idea came in. It's a great one.
Going back to whiskey, Mike, something that I think is overlooked, and I talk about this because I love our Dram, and Friday night's my special night. I come home and have a Dram. And my wife says, yes, you get a little sozzled or whatever. I generally don't. But I actually like snacks, and I don't actually think enough said about when you enjoy a Dram, actually something to go with it. I put it on one of the posts about the best crisp ever invented, where Scotland, no, England, no, Spain. They're called Torres, and black truffle, but they do, if you want ham, or they do caviar, but they do black truffle. And to me, forget the price when you're drinking a whiskey, probably a $5 a bag of crisp. But tonight I've got M&S cashew. And I think it's important, because when you have flavors coming out of your whiskey, to counter it. So I say, don't always think just your whiskey. What are you going to eat with it?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, there's some dark chocolates, with the right whiskey, some cheese with the right whiskey.
Yeah, absolutely. Dark chocolate. Lint do so many different, from wasabi to chili and orange.
In fact, a lot of the good guys that do tastings, especially if they have females within the group, and this is a very a generic comment, I appreciate that, but if they are hoping to introduce females to whiskey, they'll often talk about the pairings with chocolates and things like that to help acclimatize the palate and bring the flavors across.
You're giving me an idea that we should do a chocolate with whiskey
there you go.
tasting. That's a great idea, because different.
I've been trying to lose weight though, so that was a very unfair bringing up crisps at the end there. That's my downfall.
Well,
I've decided. I've actually decided. I've come to the realization that I'm crispaholic. So if I'm standing in the local supermarket and I see that they've lowered the price on Pringles, I need to walk away.
Yes. Well,
I'll only have a few, but I'll only have like 4 or 5. No, you're gonna eat the whole lot. I can't trust myself.
Well, that's exactly me. I used to drink, and that's why eat loads once a week, really. On a Friday night is my crisp night. Yeah. Otherwise, no. I take on board. And even with these, I've just brought some cashew nuts to the table that seem to go very well with this Highland Park. I normally would drink the whole bag, but, again, I'm trying to lose weight during lockdown,
I've lost a bit of stone, though. I'm quite happy. I've lost a bit of stone. And that's purely cutting out bread, crisps, and chocolate. And my life is the same in every other way. And I've lost a stone. So that just tells you, something.
I always tell people, but your whiskey, I said, look, hold on. You can't drink enough of this stuff to really put on weight. So this is part of the diet.
It is. Well, listen, it has been just over an hour, and I promised that we would keep these a little slimmer as well, just because we've still got a few people that are hanging on, but it's a long session to listen into. So cheers to everyone. And we're going to be doing this again really soon. And cheers from Scotland. And we're going to do this again really soon, Jeremy. So we'll catch up again.
And hopefully we'll do a live event with many of the people who have tuned in, and we'll all get together and all have our vaccinations and be health okay, and we'll get together.
Indeed, I mean, yes, the live event is absolutely the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow here. That's what we're wanting to do. So we had one planned that was about to happen. It was supposed to be May. Obviously, all the planning had gone ahead, and then it was all shot down in flames. So, but Jeremy, we have been chatting about various ideas for dentistry whiskey events. There will be a little bit of dentistry CPD, and there'll be plenty of the good stuff.
Keep safe, everybody, and keep safe, Mike.
Take care. All right. Good night, everybody. Cheers.
Bye bye.